Good morning, class, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're watching this video. So welcome to part 2 of this video lecture series for Substance Abuse Fundamentals. In case you missed the first one, my name is Gemma, and I'm the professor for this course this semester. So in part 1, we covered a few different concepts such as the stages of change, the stages of use or progression of use, and then the topic of compassion, empathy versus sympathy. And a lot of you throughout the discussion post seem to really grasp those concepts, and so I was inspired by that and picked 2 more concepts that I think are essential for you to have for your own professional and personal development. So the concepts I'm going to introduce to you are not ones that are in your textbook, and therefore they will not be on your quizzes or exams. There will be a required discussion post, but that would be the extent of that. You won't see this material anywhere else, and as a matter of fact, this material wouldn't be in any textbooks because it's the latest findings in neurobiology. And so we're going to look at the brain, and we're going to use the hand as a model for the brain in order to describe that. And we're also going to look at some essential nutrients, so to speak, that the brain needs in order to develop and heal itself. These concepts were not devised by me. I've just been in the field practicing, finding new material to inspire my clients, to inspire my students. I even share these concepts with my 12-year-old daughter. I think it's essential for her to know what drugs and alcohol does to the brain, and how the brain functions and all of that. I think it's a newer way of educating our youth about drug use as opposed to the old concept of DARE, just say no. Drugs are bad for you, don't do them. Same with sex, right? You're going to get an STD, you're going to get pregnant, don't do it. I think it's important to educate on what are some of the long-term emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual consequences. And so feel free to use this model with your own children, with your clients in the future. Just reference Dr. Dan Siegel. That's who devised both of these concepts that I'm going to introduce to you today. So, objectives. We're going to cover the hand model as I described, and we're also going to cover the 7 nutrients that the brain needs in order to optimally function. So we'll start with the hand model. I've summarized Dr. Dan Siegel's video lecture, which I've provided a link to in the comments box here on this YouTube video. I've summarized it down to 3 different parts of the brain. Just generally speaking, I think it's easier for the population I work with who, deteriorated huge portions of the brain through chronic drug use over long periods of time. So I've broken it down to 3 different parts of the brain, although Dr. Dan Siegel refers to 5. So if this is your brain, so say that this is kind of like the frontal lobe, and then this is the midbrain, and then this is like the brain stem and spinal cord. So there's 3 different functions to this brain: 1, 2, and 3. The oldest part of the brain we'll refer to as the reptilian brain because, that's the theory that we've evolved. So this is the reptilian brain. How do you remember what this is responsible for? Well, what do reptiles do? When they're hot, they go into the shade. When they're cold, they go into the sun. They eat, they sleep, they just survive, right? Well, that's what this part of the brain is responsible for. All those systems in the body that operate on a daily, minute to minute, second to second format to keep you alive, such as the cardiac system pumping blood throughout the whole body, the digestive system secreting toxins and taking in nutrients, the central nervous system, always scanning the environment, regulating the electricity in the brain and throughout the messages it sends throughout the body. All those functions, when you know that you're hungry, when you know that you're sleepy, they are controlled by the reptilian part of the brain, the oldest part of the brain. But as we've continued to evolve, we've developed the midbrain, or you can refer to it in order to remember it, the mammalian brain. So what do we have in common with mammals? Yes, we also have these characteristics in common with them. We survive, we're still here, but at the same time, we also have the capacity to remember, so memory, and we have certain emotions in common with all mammals. Emotions that are necessary for our evolution, such as anger, jealousy, attachment, what we call love. Those type of emotions are necessary for our evolution. So think about it. We've had them for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we continue to have them, so they must serve a purpose. And so that purpose might be they cue you to protect your kin, to protect yourself, to protect your belongings, to become weary, to scan for dangers. And so I think the part, I want to just a little bit of a side note, because I'm a counselor, a lot of my work is with these types of emotions, and I like to normalize these emotions for my clients in the sense that we are all human and we all have these emotions. When they become unhealthy is when we feel them chronically, so day in, day out. If that's what's, in the forefront of our brain is thinking these emotions, and in our body we're feeling them, they can have long-term negative effects. But the emotions themselves are a normal part of our humanness. So I just want to throw that side note in there. So mammalian brain, responsible for memory and for emotions. So let me give you an example of this. Say that I was out in the wild and I ended up eating some type of green leaf of some sort that then ended up giving me diarrhea, and I dehydrated and I almost died. Then this part of the brain is going to register that leaf is very dangerous, do not eat it. So you can see how it's part of our evolutionary function to stay alive, and this part of the brain helps with that. At the same time, if I were to eat a substance or consume a substance, maybe a drug of some sort, and it took away and numbed all of my pain, that memory would definitely be stored in here, in this part of the brain, whether consciously or unconsciously. And it would say, remember that time that you consumed that substance and all your worries went away? And so this part of the brain can help us, but at the same time, it can deter us and cause us harm too, which is probably why we developed the third part of the brain, which is the frontal lobe or the frontal cortex. It's the newest part of the brain, so because it's the newest, we don't necessarily engage it or use it as much as the other two, and we have to make a conscious effort to use this part of the brain. It's responsible for higher order thinking, such as abstract thinking, creatively thinking. It's responsible for thinking about the future and consequences of your actions, whereas this part of the brain is a little bit more impulsive. It says, hey, that feels good, go do it. Hey, that doesn't feel good, don't do that. This part of the brain's like, hey, even though that feels good, maybe you ought to think about this. So that's the newest part of the brain. And I actually just had this conversation with my daughter, I think a few weeks ago, in which I told her, based on this hand model, why do you think it's not a good idea for you to experiment with drugs and alcohol? And she was having a hard time coming up with the answer, and so I kind of gave her a clue. I said this part of the brain, the frontal lobe, that's responsible for thinking about consequences and abstract thinking and creativity and problem solving doesn't actually fully develop until about mid-20s. And, you know, instantly she got the answer. She's like, well, it's not a good idea right now because my frontal lobe is still developing. Sorry, I apologize. Let me just get that. This is Gemma. Thank you. Bye. So that is the 3 parts of the brain: reptilian brain, mammalian brain, and then the frontal lobe, frontal cortex, however you want to reference it. Again, I would definitely recommend that you watch Dr. Dan Siegel video lecture on that. It's very short, just a few, and I think under 10 minutes. As he gives a different description, that's just how I've digested the information, and I find it helpful. If you're going to take a trauma class in the future, I would highly suggest you keep this model of the brain in mind, and then consider what part of the brain trauma is stored in, and what part of the brain we need to activate in order to, you know, fully process that we're no longer in danger, that we're safe now. So I'll give you a little bit of a hint. So the trauma would be stored in the very emotional part of the brain, and it's where it says it's not safe when there's a trigger in the environment, whether that's a smell or something someone said, or a sound, or a memory that comes up. Here are the triggers, and so we're highly activated and we think we're not safe. We need to do something, get out and run or fight, or we just freeze. So this part of the brain would be the part that we have to engage, and it's not easy when we're highly activated because of a trauma, but we have to engage it and say, hey, you're safe now, you're not in danger, that was the past, this is now, and we have to kind of talk our brain into realizing that piece. So that's all I have for you on the brain model. If you would be so kind to put me on a different screen or minimize me, which is what I'm doing, and I'm going over to that first resource provided for you. The website is drdansiegel.com, resources, Healthy Mind Platter. And so we're going to take a look and talk about the Healthy Mind Platter. So I don't know if you remember when you were in school, maybe like elementary, middle school, they used to promote, it was the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, used to promote this pyramid type of model on what nutrients you should consume for your body to be considered, you know, healthy. On a daily basis, they considered you needed this much fruits, this much vegetables, this much carbs, protein. At the top, it was like a tiny little bit of sugar, right? So that's actually a really old model, and since then they've replaced, the USDA has replaced that model by saying that instead everybody's body is a little bit different, and so everybody needs different nutrients depending on the time of the month. You know, if you're PMSing, you might need different nutrients before and after PMSing, and so if you're working out, you know, heavily 1 week or 1 day, you might need different nutrients at that time than you do when you're not lifting weights or running. So everybody's body's different on every single day, and so it's just a recommended set of nutrients that you need, and then you pick and choose how much of those nutrients you need every day. So based on that newer model of how to take care of our physical bodies, you can think of this Healthy Mind Platter like that also. So they're recommending these 7 daily essential mental activities that will help optimize brain matter and help integrate all 3 parts of the brain. Because sometimes, I don't know if you've heard the expression, you flipped your lid. That literally is a really good description of what's happening here. The frontal lobe is no longer communicating with the other parts of the brain, and so we're highly activated. And this part is the go switch, and it's like, you know, stress, anxiety, depression, all of that. Substance use, high triggers, high cravings. So what they're recommending is that these 7 daily essential mental activities can help integrate the brain. So bring that frontal lobe down and have open communication between the entire brain. So we're going to start with the bottom activity in that list. There's sleep time, downtime, time in, physical time. So we're looking at that portion right now. So the first recommended essential mental activity is sleep time. This is obvious, this one's not new for you. This is when you give your brain the rest it needs in order to consolidate all the information it's picked up from throughout the day. And obviously the recommended amount of sleep for an adult is 6 to 8 hours, whereas, the younger you get, the more hours of sleep you need. I think I remember when my daughter was 6, she was sleeping like 10, 12 hours a day. And so other than sleep time that's recommended on a daily basis is also downtime. This is referring to time when we're not goal-oriented. This is when we let our mind just wander off wherever it wants to go, or time to relax and not think about anything specifically. And it's that time is necessary for the brain to recharge itself. What it's usually doing during your REM sleep, by giving ourselves that downtime, we're kind of recreating that environment for it to be able to recharge, but while we're awake. And again, there is no recommended dosage of how much time is appropriate time for you. That's something that you'll have to determine for yourself. And so the third essential mental activity that's recommended is time in. So that means looking internally to see what you're feeling, what sensations are coming up. Am I activated? Am I triggered right now? Let me bring myself down. Becoming more aware of the thoughts that you're having, the memories that are coming up. Is there a theme among them? Just a time of reflecting inward. This is where the mindfulness practice would come in, and I believe that will be the last video lecture I do. Don't quote me on that for this class. I'm really enjoying doing this, so maybe I'll squeeze 1 or 2 more out of it. But I definitely want to leave you with mindfulness practices, which targets this specific essential mental activity, which is time in. This next one, physical time, is also not new to you. This is recommended that we move our bodies aerobically. That's referring to more of cardio exercises where you get the heart pumping, blood throughout the whole body, oxygenates the brain, oxygenates the body. So some amount of that every single day. And then connecting time. I don't think that I've considered this before to be absolutely necessary for optimal brain development and matter and usage, but it absolutely makes sense why it's in this list. So connecting time, time where you spend with other people, and it depends if you're an introvert or an extrovert, what that means to you. For an introvert, maybe just being at a coffee shop around other people and not talking to them is enough connecting time. Whereas an extrovert might need to have lunch and then dinner with other people and have a schedule of things, right? So again, it's a very individualized thing, but connecting with others is part of this essential mental activity. Also, this could be connecting with nature, or maybe even animals, other sentient beings. It kind of takes us out of that selfish part of the brain where we think, we're the center of the world and everything revolves around us. It takes us out of that, and it develops compassion and empathy. 2 more to cover. So they also say that an essential mental activity to optimize brain matter is playtime. Now this one was new to me. I'm not the most playful. I'm very focused. So this one, it kind of blew my mind, and this is probably the one I have to work on the most. But playtime is when we allow ourselves to be spontaneous or creative, playfully enjoying new, novel experiences. This can help create new neural pathways in the brain. And lastly is focus time. This is when we are focused on a goal, and we take on new challenges that also create new neural pathways in the brain. So obviously that probably would be using more of the frontal, whether the right or left hemisphere is another question, but the frontal part of the brain. Okay, so just to summarize, these are the 7 essential mental activities that are recommended. These were devised by Dr. Dan Siegel, who met with professionals, renowned professionals, I should add, in different disciplines such as neuropsychology, psychology, sociology, neurobiology, psychiatry, counseling, and got everyone's feedback, consolidated all that information, and therefore we have the Healthy Mind Platter. And I should say that Dr. Dan Siegel is a Harvard graduate. He did all of his post-medical studies at UCLA. He's currently a clinical professor of psychiatry there. He's also a psychotherapist in practice. His major focus is on how early on attachments in childhood and throughout life affect the way our emotions are expressed or not expressed, our behaviors, and the personal narrative that we tell ourselves about ourselves and about the world, whether it's a hostile place or a safe place. He proposes in his interpersonal neurobiology model, which these are little segments of that, that though the attachments, are probably the core focus of any psychotherapy, and I would completely agree with this. The more I practice, the more I'm in the field, the more I write, the more I read, the more I do my own personal work, internal work, the more I start to see that trauma and attachments are at the core of most mental health and substance abuse disorders. And so the more severe or chronic a disorder, whether that's a substance abuse or behavioral addiction or schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder, anxiety or depression, or whatever the disorder, the more severe it is, the likelier there is that there is severe trauma. So the more severe, the more trauma, and also the lack of healthy attachments to other human beings. So just something to think about. And I think that's all I have for you today. So good luck on that discussion forum, and I look forward to 1 or 2 more video lectures with you. All right, take care.